Imagine this. You are lying in the snow, bleeding. 3 days after emergency surgery, your 3-day-old daughter has gone completely silent in your arms because the cold is winning. The woman who just threw you down the stone steps is standing in the doorway above you. She says, "Merry Christmas, nobody." And the door slams shut. Now here is the part that will keep you up tonight. 4 hours earlier, your grandfather died, and he left you $2.1 billion. They threw out the wrong woman, and they had absolutely no idea. My name is Claire Whitmore. This is not a revenge story. This is the story of what happens when the people who call you nothing find out exactly who you are. Stay until the boardroom scene.
She loves the fresh air.
I promise you, 4 million people watched it live, and not one of them saw the ending coming. Here is what this story will teach you. The people who underestimate you are not seeing clearly, and that is your greatest advantage. This story is for every person who has ever been made to feel invisible, disposable, or not enough. It is proof that your lowest moment is not your final one, and that being thrown away is not the same thing as being worthless. If that speaks to you, hit the like button right now so this story reaches someone else who needs it today. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done in Claire's shoes? Subscribe and turn on notifications because the story we have for you next week is even more unbelievable than this one. And share this with one person in your life who needs to be reminded of their own strength.
My name is Claire Elizabeth Whitmore, and on the night of December 23rd, I was lying in a snowbank outside a $12 million Connecticut mansion with a 3-day-old baby pressed against my chest and blood soaking through my coat. My husband's mother had just called me garbage. His mistress had left, and my husband, the man who promised to love me until death, had watched from the doorway without saying a single word. What none of them knew, what I did not even know yet, was that 4 hours earlier, my grandfather had died, and he had left me everything. $2.1 billion, 43 companies, 17 properties across 9 states, and one handwritten instruction at the bottom of his will, in shaky but determined script. Make them understand what they threw away. Now, before I tell you how this ends, and I promise you, the ending will make your jaw drop, I need you to understand something first. I was not a fighter. I was a 5th grade school teacher from Dayton, Ohio, who made her own Christmas ornaments, cried at dog food commercials, and genuinely believed that if you loved someone hard enough and long enough, they would eventually love you back the right way. I was the last person on earth anyone would expect to walk into a boardroom 2 months later and dismantle an entire dynasty in front of 4 million people watching live. But here's what I learned lying in that snow with my daughter going quiet in my arms. Being underestimated is the most dangerous weapon you never knew you had. Stay with me, because the moment Margaret Ashford realizes who she threw out into that blizzard, that moment alone is worth every second of this story. 3 years earlier, I was a perfectly ordinary person living a perfectly ordinary life, and I was completely fine with that. I taught 5th grade at Riverside Elementary in Greenwich, Connecticut. I had 32 kids who needed me to show up every day, a small apartment I was genuinely proud of, a best friend named Diane Calloway, who worked the overnight shift in the ER and still somehow had the energy to call me every morning, and a mother who had worked double shifts at a hospital cafeteria in Dayton for 18 years to make sure I could go to college. I did not have money. I did not have connections. I did not have any particular reason to believe that any of that was about to change. Then I met Harrison Ashford at a school fundraiser. He was 31, tall, easy smile, the kind of comfortable confidence that comes from never once having to worry about rent. He was there representing his family's foundation, which made substantial donations to Greenwich Public Schools every year. I was there because I had organized the whole event and was running on 2 hours of sleep and a gas station coffee. He found me in the kitchen at 9 in the evening, trying to fix a folding table that had collapsed under the weight of the dessert display. He said, "Claire, let me help you with that," I said. "I have it under control, thank you." He said, "Your elbow is in the chocolate fountain." It was. I had not noticed. We talked for 3 hours. He was funny and attentive, and he asked me real questions. Not the polite nodding kind, but the kind where you can tell the person actually wants to know the answer. He asked about my students by name after I mentioned them. He remembered details from earlier in the conversation and circled back to them. I drove home thinking, well, that was unexpectedly lovely, and assumed I would never see him again. He called the school the next morning and asked if he could take me to dinner. I want to be honest about something here, because I think it matters. I knew from the beginning that Harrison Ashford and I were from different worlds. He grew up in a 12,000 square foot estate in Greenwich. I grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Dayton where the heat sometimes went out in February. His family had old money, the kind that has been accumulating for 3 generations. My mother had a savings account she called her just-in-case fund that never had more than $400 in it. I knew it was complicated. I went to dinner anyway. I want to pause here and say something directly to anyone listening who has ever talked themselves into something they knew was uneven from the start. There's a difference between a relationship that challenges you and a relationship that requires you to constantly shrink yourself to fit. I did not know the difference yet. A lot of us do not know it until we are already in the middle of it. The first time I met Margaret Ashford was 6 weeks into dating Harrison. Sunday dinner at the estate. The dining room alone was larger than my entire apartment. Margaret shook my hand at the door, the way you handle a piece of produce you have already decided not to buy. She looked at my dress, which was from Target, and which I had thought looked nice. Mama smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes and said, "How charming. Harrison always did have an adventurous spirit." Diane told me later that adventurous spirit is old Connecticut money code for what on earth were you thinking? Edward Ashford, Harrison's father, was cordial in the way of someone who has decided you are not worth the energy of open hostility. He asked me twice what my father did for work, despite my having explained the first time that I did not know my father. He left when I was 4. Brooke, Harrison's younger sister, was 24 and in the middle of building what she called her personal brand online. She filmed almost everything. She filmed dinner. She filmed me trying to find the right fork. She did not post any of it that night, but she filed it away, and I would not understand until much later what that filing system was for. Harrison said nothing during any of this. He smiled, he ate his salmon, he refilled my water glass once. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself he would stand up for me when it mattered. I told myself that people's families are complicated, and what matters is the 2 people at the center. We married 8 months later. Margaret planned the wedding, not because I asked her to, because she announced she would be handling it, and Harrison did not contradict her, and by the time I understood what was happening, the venue was booked, the flowers were chosen, and my mother's name was on the seating chart in the back row, table 11, near the kitchen. My mother wore her good blue dress and smiled the whole night and never once said a word about table 11. I have thought about that 1,000 times since. What it costs a person to smile like that. The first year of our marriage, I learned the rules. I learned that I did not eat with the family at formal dinners. I helped in the kitchen first, served the guests, and sat down last if there was time. Margaret had a phrase for it. She said, "Claire is just so wonderfully hands-on, is she not?" And everyone nodded, and no one said anything, and I carried the serving dishes and told myself this was temporary. I learned that my opinion on anything related to the house, the social calendar, the family investments, or Harrison's career was not only unwelcome, but actively hazardous to bring up. Margaret would look at me across the table with an expression of patient tolerance and say, "That is very sweet, dear," and then continue as though I had not spoken. I learned that Harrison's kindness, the real warm, attentive version I had met at the school fundraiser, existed in private. In public, in his family's presence, he became a different person, quieter, deferred to his mother in ways that were so automatic they seemed almost unconscious. He was not cruel to me in those moments. He was simply absent. The second year, I stopped mentioning it. The third year, I got pregnant. Harrison was happy for approximately 2 weeks. He bought a crib. He came to one ultrasound appointment. He told his parents over dinner, and Margaret smiled and said, "Well, let us hope it has the Ashford cheekbones," and laughed. And Harrison laughed too. Then he became distant. His phone was always face down on the table. He started working late 3 nights a week, then 4. When I asked about his day, he gave me 2-sentence answers and went back to his phone. I told myself he was stressed about work. I told myself that men sometimes struggled with the reality of impending fatherhood. I told myself a lot of things that December while I sat in our living room, which was his family's living room really, and counted the weeks until my due date and tried to believe that everything was going to be fine. I was 38 weeks pregnant on the night my water broke. It was 6 weeks early. The doctor called it precipitous labor. I called Harrison 4 times on the way to the hospital. He answered on the 4th call, sounding distracted, and said he would be right there. He arrived at Mercy General 2 hours later. He stayed for 4 minutes. He looked at Grace, who was tiny and red-faced and perfect and screaming, and he said, "She looks like a baby." Then his phone buzzed, and he stepped into the hallway and did not come back. Grace was born on December 20th at 11:47 at night. She weighed 6 pounds and 2 ounces. She had my mother's nose and Harrison's chin and absolutely nobody's patience. Harrison did not visit on the 21st. He did not visit on the 22nd. On the night of December 22nd, I lay in my hospital bed, with Grace asleep in the bassinet beside me, and I watched the door, and I counted the ceiling tiles, and I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. There was. It just was not a reasonable I was prepared for. Diane came to see me at 10 o'clock on the night of December 22nd. She was still in her scrubs from the ER shift downstairs, and her hair was coming out of its ponytail, and she looked like someone who had been rehearsing what she was about to say for the entire elevator ride up. She said, "Claire, honey, I need you to see something before you hear it from someone else." She handed me her phone, already open to Instagram, already on Harrison's account. He had posted 4 hours earlier. It was a photograph of him with a woman I had never seen. She was beautiful in a polished, deliberate way, dark hair, perfect posture, one hand resting on a very visible, pregnant belly. They were at a rooftop restaurant in Manhattan, the kind with the white tablecloths and the skyline views and the prix-fixe menu that costs more than my monthly grocery budget. Harrison was smiling, not the distracted half-smile I had been getting for 8 months, a real smile, the one I remembered from the school fundraiser. The caption said, "Choosing authenticity, choosing love, choosing the life I was always meant to live." 42,000 likes. I read the comments because I could not stop myself. Someone wrote, "Congratulations, she is gorgeous." Someone wrote, "Finally, being your true self, King." Someone wrote, "Wait, is he not married?" The last comment had 37 replies. I handed the phone back to Diane. I did not say anything for a long time. Diane sat on the edge of my bed, She did not say anything either. That is how you know someone is really your friend. They know when words make it worse. Finally, I said, "Who is she?" Diane said, "Her name is Savannah Prescott. She has been posting pictures with Harrison for about 6 weeks." I did not know, Claire. I swear I did not know until tonight. 6 weeks. Grace was 3 days old. The math was very clear and very ugly. I want to say something here because I know some of you recognize this pattern. The phone face down, the late nights, the way someone you love stops looking at you directly, like they have decided you are no longer the main character in their story. Therapists call these withdrawal signals, and the cruelest thing about them is that when we love someone, we become absolute experts at explaining them away. I explained Harrison's distance for 8 months. I invented reasons for it. I protected him from my own suspicion because I could not afford for my suspicion to be correct. If you are in that pattern right now, if you are working very hard to explain something your gut already understands, please hear me. You are not protecting yourself by looking away. You are just delaying the moment of clarity and spending your own energy to do it. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. The screen showed R. Whitmore, private, for just a second before going to voicemail. I did not answer it. I was too shattered to move. I would find out much later that my grandfather, a man named Robert Whitmore, who had been searching for me for 2 years, had tried to call me that night to arrange our first meeting. His flight from London had just landed. He was planning to come to the hospital the next morning. I let it ring. The morning of December 23rd, Dr. Patricia Walsh came in with my discharge papers. She was kind, careful, and clearly uneasy about something. Before she could explain what that something was, the door opened. Margaret Ashford walked in first. Designer coat, Hermes bag. The expression of a woman who has already decided how this conversation ends. Behind her came Edward, Harrison's father, in a dark suit that cost more than most people's first cars. Then Harrison himself, who could not look at me, whose eyes went to a point on the wall just past my left shoulder and stayed there. Then Savannah Prescott, hand on her belly, a small, careful smile on her face. And last came Brooke, 27, and already holding up her phone, already recording. Dr. Walsh stepped forward. "Visiting hours are not until 9, she said. Margaret handed her a folder without looking at her. "Child Protective Services," Margaret said. "My daughter-in-law is experiencing a severe psychiatric episode. We are here to protect the infant." The folder contained a psychiatric evaluation from a doctor, Conrad Ellis, the Ashford family's personal physician, recommending the immediate temporary removal of Grace from my custody pending a full evaluation. It was forged. I did not know that yet. Savannah stepped forward and produced a second document. DNA test results. "The probability of paternity," she said, "is 0%. I looked at Harrison. He was looking at the wall. I said, "You cannot test a newborn without the mother's consent." Edward said, "We have a court order." He did not have a court order. He said it the way powerful men say things they know will not be challenged in the moment. Brooke said, "Hey everyone, you wanted the truth about my brother's situation. Here it is." And her voice was the cheerful, confessional voice of someone who has learned that other people's pain is excellent content. 500,000 people began to watch me in a hospital gown with an IV in my arm while I tried to understand what was happening to my life. I want to tell you I handled it with grace. I did not. I said the word seriously approximately 11 times. Diane told me this later because she arrived partway through and counted. Margaret leaned over my bed. Her voice was very quiet. That is the thing about truly dangerous people. They do not need to shout. She said, "You were a project, Claire. A very predictable one." Harrison made a bet with his college friends. $100,000 to see if he could tolerate being married to someone like you for 3 years. You were never a wife. You were a punchline. She took out her phone and played a video. Harrison at his bachelor party, 4 years ago, drunk and laughing with 6 friends. His voice, 3 years with a Midwest school teacher for $100,000. Easy money. She will never figure it out. She is too sweet, too grateful. Laughter. So much laughter. 3 years. Every anniversary dinner. Every time I made myself smaller in that family's presence and told myself I was being patient. Every time I looked at my mother's photograph and thought about how hard she had worked to give me a life where I could afford to love someone freely. It was a bet. Margaret put divorce papers on the bed. She said, "You will sign these now, or CPS will be at this hospital at 8 tomorrow morning, and you will never see Grace again. We have 3 medical professionals prepared to testify that you are unfit." I was 3 days post-surgery. I was on pain medication. I had just watched a video of my husband laughing about our marriage to his college friends. I signed the papers. I want to say something about that. I signed them because I was terrified and alone and in pain, and because every calculation I could make in that moment pointed to one conclusion: keep Grace safe. Sometimes survival looks like surrender. It is not the same thing. Documents signed under coercion are legally contestable. I did not know that then. If you are ever in a situation where someone is using fear and isolation and physical vulnerability to force your signature on anything, especially in a medical setting, especially after birth, please know that what happens in your most vulnerable moment does not have to be permanent. Nothing they did that night was irreversible. I am living proof. December 24th, Christmas Eve, 7 in the morning. Grace was asleep in the hospital-issue car seat, covered in the thin blanket the nurses had given me. I had no coat. I had my hospital clothes and one bag that Diane had packed for me overnight, and $23 in my wallet, because Harrison had controlled our joint accounts since the first year of our marriage, and I had let him. I took an Uber to the Ashford estate because I needed my things. I needed my mother's pearl earrings, which were in the jewelry box in the bedroom I had been given, which was not the master bedroom, which had never been the master bedroom, which was a small room in the east wing that Margaret referred to as the guest accommodation, and which I had quietly thought of as my room because it was the only space in that house that was mine. My keys still worked. The household staff would not meet my eyes. My belongings had been packed into contractor bags and left in the driveway, in the sleet. Inside, I found Brooke in the main hallway wearing my mother's pearl earrings. She was taking a selfie in the mirror above the entryway console table. She said, "Oh, these? I found them in your room. Cute vintage vibe." I said, "Those belong to my mother. She is dead. Please give them back." Brooke said, "Finders keepers," and kept taking photos. I want you to understand something about that moment. I did not cry. I was so far past this place where crying was available to me that I simply stood there and looked at my mother's pearls on someone else's throat and added it to the list of things I was going to have to carry. The intercom crackled. Margaret's voice, "Claire, dear, please come to the main foyer. We are all waiting." The Ashford Estate's main foyer was the kind of room that was designed to make you feel small. Marble floors, a crystal chandelier worth more than most houses, a staircase that curved up to the second floor in a way that was clearly engineered for maximum visual impact. They were arranged like a court. Margaret at the center, Edward beside her, Harrison against the far wall, looking at the floor, Savannah with her hand on her prosthetic belly, which I did not know was prosthetic yet. 4 security guards I had never seen before stood at the exit. Margaret said. Before you leave and we proceed to remove every trace of your existence from this family, you will get on your knees and apologize for 3 years of manipulation. I said, I am leaving. Please move. Edward nodded at the security guards. What happened next happened very fast. A guard grabbed my arms from behind. I screamed because Grace was in my arms and I was 3 days post-surgery, and the movement sent a white line of pain across my abdomen. Another guard took Grace. I heard my stitches tear. I felt the warmth spreading through my shirt, and I knew it was blood, and I could not focus on that because Grace was screaming, that specific newborn scream that goes directly through a mother's nervous system like electricity, and I could not get to her. Brooke was live streaming. Her voice was cheerful and satisfied. She said, "This is what happens when you mess with the wrong family. Watch karma in real time." They dragged me across the marble floor to the front doors. My shoulder hit a column, and the pain was extraordinary. I felt something shift and grind in the joint. Later, I would find out it was dislocated. They opened the front doors. A December blizzard was in full force. 15 degrees. Wind chill of -5. Snow coming down so heavily, you could not see more than 10 feet in any direction. They threw me down the stone steps. I fell 5 steps and landed in the snow at the bottom and lay there for a moment just trying to remember how to breathe. My bag was thrown out after me, its contents scattered. Diapers. $3 and change, a photo of my mother I had kept folded in my wallet. Then a security guard leaned over the railing and set Grace down at the bottom of the steps. Not gently. I caught her. Both arms on instinct before I even registered the movement. I pulled her against my chest and curled around her, and the cold hit both of us like a wall. Margaret appeared in the doorway above us. She said, "Merry Christmas, nobody." The door closed. I sat in the snow with Grace against my chest and blood soaking through my coat and a dislocated shoulder and torn surgical stitches and nowhere to go. My phone had shattered in the fall. I had $23. It was -5 degrees. Grace was crying. Then she was not crying. Babies do not go quiet in the cold unless something is wrong. I said, "Please." I said it to no one. I said, "Please do not leave me. You are everything I have." My vision began to go gray at the edges. The hypothermia was starting. I could feel my body beginning to make the calculations that bodies make when they are running out of resources. I closed my eyes. Then I saw headlights. 3 black Escalades coming through the snow like ships through fog. They pulled to a stop directly in front of me. The doors opened before the vehicles had fully stopped. A man in his late 50s climbed out, impeccably dressed despite the hour and the weather. He knelt in the snow next to me without hesitation and ruined what I would later learn was a $4,000 suit without appearing to notice. He said, "Claire Elizabeth Whitmore, thank God we found you." I said, "Who are you?" He said, "My name is James Hartley. Your grandfather sent me." Behind him, a medical team in matching uniforms was moving toward us with heated blankets and an IV kit and a portable oxygen unit. I said, "My grandfather is dead." He said, "No, ma'am. His name is Robert Whitmore, and we need to get your daughter warm right now." Grace's temperature was 94.1. The paramedic's voice was calm, but his hands were very fast. I held her hand in the back of that Escalade, and I made her a promise. I said, "Whatever it takes. Whatever I have to become. You are never going to be cold again." Whitmore Private Medical Center was on a different planet from Mercy General. Marble floors, original artwork, patient rooms that looked like suites at a hotel where the nightly rate would make your eyes water. A neonatal team of 6 specialists who surrounded Grace the moment we arrived and initiated warming protocols with the efficiency of people who have handled true emergencies and know the difference between urgency and panic. Dr. Amanda Foster, the head of neonatology, came to speak with me while her team worked. She said, "You brought her in at the last possible moment, another 5 to 7 minutes, and she would have sustained permanent damage." I was in surgery for my shoulder and my stitches while Grace was in the neonatal unit. Blood transfusion, IV antibiotics, pain medication that actually worked. I woke up 7 hours later to sunlight through enormous windows and the sound of monitors beeping steadily, which I was learning to understand as a comforting sound. The sound of things being measured and managed. James Hartley was sitting in the chair beside my bed with a leather portfolio on his knee and the expression of a man who has been rehearsing a difficult conversation. He told me about my grandfather. Robert Whitmore, 74 years old, self-made, oil and technology. Started with a drilling company in West Texas at 26 and built it into a global energy and infrastructure conglomerate over 40 years. No old money. Every dollar earned. My mother's name before she changed it was Catherine Whitmore. She ran away from home at 19 after a fight with Robert about my father, a man Robert had correctly identified as someone interested in the family money. Catherine was stubborn. Robert was stubborn. Neither of them apologized. My father left when I was 2. My mother worked 3 jobs and raised me alone and died in a car accident on the interstate outside Dayton at the age of 47. Robert found out she was gone 3 days later. He had been watching her from a distance for years, too proud to reach out, telling himself there would be more time. There was not more time. He spent the 2 years after her death searching for me. He found me 18 months ago, just after my wedding. He spent those months watching through the security team he had placed on the Ashford property, watching what they did to me, watching and being advised by his attorneys to wait until the inheritance structure was legally airtight so that the Ashfords could never claim the money was why I married Harrison. James said he wanted to step in every single week. We advised patience. We were building a structure that would protect you permanently. I said, he watched them treat me like that for a year and a half. James said, yes, and it cost him. It showed in his health. He was planning to come to you the morning after Grace was born. He had a letter. He was going to introduce himself. The plan was for December 24th. I said, the call, the night of the 22nd. James nodded. He called from the plane. He was trying to reach you before he landed to let you know he was coming. When you did not answer, he assumed you were resting. He landed at 6 in the morning on December 24th. He went to his car. His security team's heat sensors on the GPS tracker in your bracelet sent an alert. Body temperature dropping toward hypothermic range. He pulled up the live security feed from the Ashford estate. He watched everything. The marble floor, the stairs, the snow. James stopped talking for a moment. He said, his driver called me at 7:04. Robert had collapsed. He was declared gone at 7:21, heart attack. I looked at the window. James said, Claire, at 3 in the morning, when they threw you down those steps, you were exactly what they called you. You had nothing. You were powerless. But at 7:21, the moment the death certificate was recorded, you became the sole heir to $2.1 billion and 43 companies. They left you for dead in the snow while the clock was counting down to the moment you would own everything. He handed me an envelope, my grandfather's handwriting, shaky but deliberate. I read it out loud because my throat needed something to do. My dear Claire, if you are reading this, I did not make it in time to say it myself, and I am so sorry. I was a stubborn old man who thought patience and planning were the answer to everything. I was wrong. I should have come to you the day I found you. I should have knocked on that door and introduced myself and told you that you were loved, and that you had family, and that you did not have to carry any of it alone. Instead, I waited for the legal structure to be perfect. I was protecting your inheritance. I should have been protecting you. I saw the footage this morning. Watching them throw you and your baby Grace into the snow broke something in me that I think was already broken a long time ago when I let your mother walk away and told myself she would come back. Take what I have built. It is yours. Every dollar of it. Make them understand what they threw away. And please forgive a stubborn old man who loved you from a distance when he should have loved you face to face. All my love, Grandpa Bob. I held the letter against my chest. I said, he signed it, Grandpa Bob. Diane, who had arrived sometime in the last hour and was sitting on the windowsill, pretending not to cry, said, I am not crying. I have a piece of dust in both eyes simultaneously. James said, the trust is already active. Everything transfers immediately. No probate. The board of directors has been briefed. As of this morning, you are the chairwoman and CEO of Whitmore Global Industries. I looked up at him. Something was happening behind my eyes. Not tears. Something colder and more purposeful than tears. I said, tell me everything about the Ashford family. Every vulnerability, every debt, every secret. I want to know exactly where each of them is weak. James looked at me for a moment. He said, now you sound like your grandfather. 3 days after Christmas, in a private conference room at Whitmore Global's Manhattan headquarters, I sat at the head of a table for the first time in my life and listened to James Hartley lay out the complete picture of the family I had married into. Grace was beside me in a designer stroller, supervised by a member of the Whitmore medical staff, healthy and warm and already demonstrating strong opinions about being put down. James began with Ashford Industries. The company was carrying $67 million in debt. The reasons were not complicated. Edward Ashford had embezzled $2.4 million from the employee pension fund over 6 years to finance his lifestyle. A series of failed real estate investments had cost the company another $22 million. Outstanding operating loans accounted for the rest. Ashford Industries was approximately 90 days from insolvency. Edward had applied for a $75 million infrastructure contract with Whitmore Global the previous month. That contract represented their only viable path to survival. I was the person who controlled whether they received it. Margaret's boutiques, 5 locations in Connecticut and Manhattan, were all located in buildings owned by Whitmore subsidiaries. She was $390,000 behind on her lease payments. The boutiques themselves were operating at a loss. Additionally, our forensic accounting team had identified $1.8 million in income that had not been reported to the IRS. Then James presented the file on Brooke. Brooke Ashford claimed to be 24 on every professional profile, every brand partnership agreement, every modeling agency contract. Her actual age was 27. She had also undergone significant cosmetic procedures that her agency contract required to be disclosed. None of them had been disclosed. James set a folder on the table. The Prestige Talent Agency, he said, which represents Brooke, was acquired by a Whitmore subsidiary 2 weeks ago. Brooke is not aware of this. I said, what about Harrison? James opened the next folder. Harrison had embezzled $3.2 million from Ashford Industries over 4 years, funneled through a series of shell accounts used to finance his relationship with Savannah. His father knew. It had been covered up as a bookkeeping irregularity. He slid a printed screenshot across the table, the college bet, documented in a group chat between Harrison and 7 friends. Harrison's words, dated 4 years ago. She will never figure it out. She is too sweet, too grateful. Then James said, there is a second component to the bet. I looked up. James said, there was a bonus clause. If Harrison produced a legitimate heir with you and then successfully divorced you with no financial settlement, the payout doubled to $200,000. The room was very quiet. I said, Grace was part of the calculation. James said, yes. I looked at my daughter in her stroller. She was examining her own hand with the concentrated attention of someone who has just discovered something extraordinary. I said, what about Savannah? Her real name was Savannah Marie Langford. 2 prior fraud convictions in Florida. The pattern was consistent. Wealthy men, fake pregnancies, significant financial theft before disappearing. The pregnancy she had claimed with Harrison was prosthetic, a high-quality medical-grade silicone appliance purchased online. James played a phone call recording, Harrison's voice and Edward's voice, from 6 weeks earlier. Edward, she is not actually pregnant, Harrison. Harrison, I know, Dad. Edward, and you are fine with that, Harrison. She is useful right now. Claire will not fight as hard if she thinks I am starting a real family. I said, he knew. He knew she was not pregnant, and he used her anyway. Against me. James said, yes. I did not say anything for a long time. I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline and thought about all the years I had spent making myself smaller and quieter and more accommodating, trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me, trying to earn approval from people who had already decided I was a prop in someone else's story. Then I said, I want to begin immediately. I need to be honest with you about what the next 8 weeks actually look like, because there is a version of this story where I tell you I transformed into a polished, ice-cold businesswoman in 2 months, and every single thing went smoothly. That would be a satisfying story. It would also be a lie. The first week, I had a custody hearing. The judge was Honorable Gerald Whitfield, who played golf with Edward Ashford every other Sunday, and who awarded temporary custody of Grace to Harrison and Margaret pending a 30-day evaluation. Based primarily on forged psychiatric documentation and paid witness statements from former Ashford estate staff. A social worker took Grace from my arms in the hallway of the courthouse. Margaret caught my eye across the marble floor as she carried my daughter to the family car. She did not smile. She did not need to. That night, alone in the Whitmore penthouse, I called James. I said, no more following their rules. Arrange the contract meeting. All of them in one room. And then I want everything. Every piece of evidence, every legal instrument, every vulnerability. I want it all ready for one moment. James said, are you certain? I said, they have my daughter. Yes, I am certain, he said. Now you sound like your grandfather. He said it again. I noticed. The following weeks were the hardest work I had ever done, and also, in some strange way, the most purposeful I had ever felt. I took a crash course in financial management from Whitmore Global Executives. I was not a natural. In my first board presentation, I misread a quarterly report and stated a figure with the wrong decimal point in front of 12 people who collectively managed a 9-figure portfolio. Dead silence. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and said out loud, you have 2 options. Go back in there and correct it, or become the person who hid in a bathroom. I went back in. I corrected it. I answered 3 follow-up questions correctly. The meeting continued. James bought me a calculator with very large buttons the following week. He said it was ergonomic. I knew what it was. By week 4, I was running the Monday executive meeting alone. I started therapy, real therapy, twice a week for trauma. Not because it was strategic, because I was honest enough to know that what had been done to me had left marks that no amount of professional preparation could address. I had nightmares about the snow every single night. I cried in the Whitmore building bathroom at least 4 separate times. Healing and preparation happened simultaneously, and both of them were real, and neither of them made the other one less necessary. James and the legal team executed the strategic work in parallel. Whitmore Global quietly purchased $67 million of Ashford Industries debt from 14 separate creditors through shell companies. We now held the note. We filed the lease violation and tax evasion documentation with the IRS regarding Margaret's boutiques. We prepared the eviction notices for all 5 boutique locations. We delivered a complete dossier on Savannah Langford to Harrison's personal address via anonymous courier. Her criminal history, her prior fake pregnancies, the digital metadata on the ultrasound image she had shown him, which proved it had been purchased from a stock photo website, and a note, in my handwriting. You should check the belly. It is not real. Harrison threw Savannah out of the estate the following afternoon. The prosthetic hit the hardwood floor with a sound that his security cameras, now monitored by my team, captured clearly. Savannah was arrested by California authorities the following day on the outstanding warrant. And then something happened that none of us had planned for. Brooke called me. She asked to meet alone. I brought James and a recording setup and 2 lawyers. She arrived looking nothing like the girl who had filmed my eviction with cheerful narration. She looked exhausted and younger somehow, like she had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally decided she could not carry it anymore. She said, I have something, and I need you to know I have been trying to decide what to do with it for 6 weeks. She handed me her phone, a video dated 2 months earlier, shot from a partially open doorway. Margaret and Edward in the Ashford Estate Library. Margaret's voice. The Walsh woman needs to sign the affidavit, or her career at Mercy General is finished. Make sure she understands this is not optional. Edward. And if Claire wins custody anyway. Margaret. Then we use the Ellis report. We have done this before, Edward. We did it with Harrison's first wife. I looked up. Brooke said, his name was Harrison Ashford, and he was married before you. Her name was Allison Kerr. They were married for 8 months. She was not from money. Mom decided she was not suitable, and they went after her the same way. Forged documents, paid witnesses, character assassination. She left the state. She stopped. She said, I was 22. I helped them. I told myself it was family loyalty, and she would be fine, and I have spent 5 years knowing that was not true. She looked at me. She said, I filmed what they did to you in that hospital room, and I posted it to 500,000 people, and I told myself it was content, and I have not slept properly since December. The room was very quiet. I said, why are you doing this now? She said, because I watched you get thrown down those stairs with your 3-day-old baby, and I kept filming, and I did not stop. And I need to do one thing that is not that. I looked at James. He gave a very small nod. The video was admissible. It was filmed on her own phone in her own family home, and she was providing it voluntarily. I said, Brooke, the pearls. She reached into her coat pocket and set my mother's pearl earrings on the conference table. I picked them up. I said, thank you. She said, I am so sorry, Claire. I did not say it was all right, because it was not all right. But I said, I know. And I think that was enough for that room and that moment. 2 days before the boardroom meeting, Savannah called me. She said, I need to tell you something. Harrison knows his father is about to be indicted. He has offshore accounts. He is planning to leave before the FBI moves, and he is planning to take Grace with him. He said it last night. He said the kid is leverage. I said, why are you telling me this? She said, Because he was going to use me the same way he used you. And because I am not, she stopped. I am not a good person, but I am not that. Diane's reaction when I told her, so let me make sure I have this straight. The fake pregnant con artist is now on your team. I said yes. Diane said, your life has taken a turn. I said, I was aware. James filed an emergency motion to flag Harrison's passport that afternoon. The FBI, working from the existing embezzlement documentation, fast-tracked the request. Harrison was stopped at JFK at 11 p.m. with 2 carry-on bags, $40,000 in cash, and a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands. Grace was not with him. She was at the estate. He had been going to leave her behind. Even as leverage, she was not worth staying for. I sat with that for a long time. Then I said, arrange the meeting, April 14th, 2 in the afternoon. Whitmore Global Headquarters, Manhattan. 40th floor. I had been standing in front of my bathroom mirror for 45 minutes. White Tom Ford blazer, my mother's pearl earrings, Robert Whitmore's signet ring on my right hand, red Louboutins, platinum hair, a quiet nod to my grandfather's silver, red lipstick, the exact shade of decisive. I looked at my reflection for a long time. I thought about the woman who had signed divorce papers in a hospital bed on pain medication because she was terrified and alone. I thought about the woman who had sat in a snowbank with a dying baby and no phone and $23. I thought about the woman who had cried in a corporate bathroom 4 times in 8 weeks and gone back to the meeting each time. I thought about Grandpa Bob, who signed a letter to a granddaughter he had never met with all my love, and who watched from a car seat what was done to me, and whose heart broke because of it, and who left me everything he had built with one instruction. Make them understand what they threw away. I said to my reflection, let us go do that. The Ashfords arrived in a Lincoln Town car. Their Mercedes had been repossessed 3 weeks earlier. I watched from the security feed in my office. Edward's suit was too large. He had lost weight from stress. Margaret's jewelry was costume, her real pieces sold quietly over the past 6 weeks to cover boutique operating costs. Harrison looked like someone who had not slept in a month, which was accurate, because he had spent 2 weeks in processing after the JFK arrest and had been released on bail 3 days ago. They were shown to the main conference room. The CEO chair at the head of the table faced the window. The Ashfords sat. I had practiced this moment approximately 400 times. In my imagination, I was very smooth and cinematic. What actually happened was that I turned my chair around, and Margaret's face went so completely blank that for a half second, I almost laughed. Diane had warned me this might happen. She told me to picture something neutral. I pictured tax forms. It worked. I said, hello, Margaret. Edward? Harrison? Margaret's face went white. Edward grabbed the edge of the table. Harrison made a sound that was not quite a word. I said, I understand you submitted an application for a $75 million infrastructure contract with this company. Edward recovered first. He said, what is this? I said, this is a business meeting. I am the CEO. Let us begin. I picked up the remote control. The screen behind me came to life. The first image was security footage from the Ashford estate. December 24th, 3:07 in the morning, me being dragged across the marble floor, Grace being torn from my arms, the stone steps, the snow, the closed door, time-stamped. Margaret said, turn that off, I said. No, you are going to sit here and watch it. We watched it. All of it. The boardroom was completely silent. The 8 Whitmore executives, seated along the wall, who knew some of what had happened, but not all of it, watched with expressions that moved from professional neutrality to something harder and colder. When it ended, I said, at 3:07 in the morning on December 24th, I was exactly what you called me. Nobody. Poor, powerless, disposable. I advanced to the next slide. Robert Whitmore's death certificate. 7:21 a.m., December 24th. I said, 4 hours and 14 minutes after you closed that door, my grandfather died, and I became the sole heir to $2.1 billion. You left me for dead in the snow while the clock was counting down to the moment I would own everything. You simply did not know. Margaret whispered, "That is not possible." I said, "The hospital where you threatened me while I was in recovery?" Whitmore General. My grandfather funded the entire East Wing. The name on the building was mine when you were making threats inside it. I advanced the slide. Ashford Industries financial statements. 67 million in debt, now owned by Whitmore Global. I said, "You have 48 hours to pay in full. If you cannot, I begin asset seizure. That includes the estate." Edward said, "You cannot." I said, "I already did." Check with your attorneys. I have. Next slide. Margaret's Boutiques, 5 locations. Eviction effective today. Locks changed at 5 p.m. The IRS referral, filed yesterday. Margaret's hand went to her chest. Next slide. The Brook video, clear audio. Margaret's voice instructing Edward to coerce Dr. Walsh. Margaret's voice referencing Harrison's first wife. Harrison's face went very still. I said, "Allison Kerr, would you like to explain that to the federal investigators currently reviewing the coercion charges?" Next slide. Harrison's embezzlement, the offshore accounts, the JFK passport flag, the photograph of Harrison at the gate with his carry-on bags. I said, "You were going to run. You were going to leave your daughter behind." Harrison said, "Claire?" I said, "Do not." Final slide. The custody motion. Doctor. Walsh's recanted affidavit, submitted after the passport flag made clear the Ashfords were losing. 3 additional former estate employees who had come forward with sworn statements. The new evidence. The emergency hearing, scheduled for tomorrow morning with a new judge. I said, "Grace is coming home tomorrow." Harrison stood up. He said, "You have destroyed everything. You have ruined all of us. Everything we had is gone because of you." Security moved before I did. 2 guards had him back in his seat in approximately 4 seconds. I waited until the room was quiet again. I said, "You made a bet about whether you could tolerate being married to me for 3 years. You let your family treat me as staff in my own home. You stood in a doorway and watched your daughter thrown into a blizzard and said nothing. You were going to flee the country and use your child as negotiating leverage." I leaned forward slightly. I said, "I did not destroy your family, Harrison. I turned on the lights. You built this in the dark." I picked up the remote one final time. The monitor showed a YouTube live stream. Viewer count, 3.8 million. I said, "Your assistant signed the consent documentation on the way in. Paragraph 31. Covers media recording and meetings held on Whitmore Global premises. You might want to read things before you sign them. I learned that lesson in a hospital bed." Margaret stood up. She said, "You cannot do this. We will sue. We have lawyers." I said, "Sue me with what money?" "You are bankrupt." Security escorted them from the room. Margaret had to be guided firmly. Harrison went without speaking. Edward walked under his own power, but he looked like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just been told he could put it down, except that putting it down meant everything was gone. Brooke was not there. She was watching the live stream from her apartment in Portland, where she had moved 3 weeks earlier. She texted me 4 hours later, 2 words, "Thank you." I stood alone in the boardroom and looked at Manhattan through the floor-to-ceiling windows. James came in. He said, "We are at 5.2 million viewers." I nodded. My phone buzzed. "Dr. Walsh." The emergency custody hearing is confirmed for tomorrow morning. We have everything we need. I looked at Grace's photograph on my phone screen. For the first time since December, I smiled and it felt real. The emergency custody hearing was at 9 in the morning on April 15th. The new judge was the Honorable Sandra Carmichael. She was 62, had been on the family court bench for 18 years, and had, according to James, exactly 0 connections to the Ashford family and a documented record of removing children from situations of documented abuse with considerable efficiency. We presented Dr. Walsh's recanted affidavit. Dr. Walsh testified in person, which cost her something. She had been threatened with her contract renewal and had signed the coerced document and had then spent 3 weeks unable to sleep. And when Harrison's passport was flagged and it became clear the Ashford position was collapsing, she had called our office herself. She sat in the witness chair and told the truth in a clear, steady voice, and I will be grateful for that for the rest of my life. We presented the security footage from December 24th. We presented the live stream footage from Brooks' Instagram, which was legally admissible as a public broadcast, and which showed, with complete clarity and Brooks' own cheerful narration, exactly what had been done to me and to Grace in the Ashford estate on Christmas Eve. We presented sworn statements from 3 former estate employees who had witnessed the systematic treatment of Claire Whitmore over 3 years of marriage and who had been afraid to speak until it became clear the family could no longer retaliate against them. Judge Carmichael reviewed the materials for 40 minutes in recess. She returned and issued a ruling. Full immediate custody restored to Claire Whitmore. All Ashford family visitation suspended pending the outcome of ongoing criminal proceedings. Harrison Ashford's parental rights to be addressed in a formal hearing within 30 days. The social worker brought Grace into the courtroom. I stood up. Grace was 4 months old, and she had been away from me for 11 days, and she was wearing a yellow onesie that someone on the Ashford staff had dressed her in, and she was looking around the courtroom with the wide-eyed evaluation of a person who takes in her surroundings carefully, which she got from somewhere. And then she saw me, and her face did the thing. The face that babies make when they see the person who is theirs. I picked her up, and she grabbed my hair in both fists, and I stood in that courtroom and held her and did not try to stop crying and did not try to explain it and did not try to be anything other than what I was, which was her mother, and she was home. Diane was in the gallery. She was not even pretending about the dust in her eyes anymore. James had his hands clasped in front of him and was looking at the ceiling in the way of a man who is maintaining professional composure through significant effort. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. The live stream from the boardroom had been running for 16 hours and had been covered by every major news outlet by midnight. 3 million people had shared it. The hashtag Sterling Family Exposed had trended globally for 11 hours. I did not stop for the cameras. I put Grace in her car seat, and I got in the Whitmore car, and I went home. The outcomes for the Ashford family were as follows. Harrison pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud and received a 7-year sentence. During the sentencing hearing, before the judge imposed the term, Harrison's attorney submitted paperwork on his behalf. Harrison was voluntarily surrendering all parental rights to Grace Elizabeth Whitmore Ashford. The judge asked if Harrison understood what he was signing. Harrison said, yes. He did not look at me when he said it. He looked at his hands. Edward Ashford was convicted on pension fund fraud and coercion charges and sentenced to 11 years. The pension fund, partially restored through Ashford Industries asset liquidation, received a full compensatory contribution from Whitmore Global because those were employees who had done nothing wrong, and I had the resources to make them whole. Margaret Ashford received house arrest, full financial disgorgement, and a repayment schedule to the IRS that would occupy the next decade of her life. She moved into a studio apartment in Bridgeport. I heard several months later that she was working the register at a boutique in a strip mall in a town where no one knew her name. I did not feel triumphant about this. I felt tired, and then I felt done, and then I stopped feeling anything about Margaret Ashford at all, which was the best outcome I could have hoped for. Brooke testified fully against her family. Her cooperation was substantial, and her attorney negotiated reduced charges down to a fine and probation. She moved to Portland and started a small pottery studio. We exchange Christmas cards. It is complicated, and I think it will always be complicated, and I think that is actually fine. She made one right choice when it cost her everything. That counts for something. I have not decided yet how much. Savannah Langford cooperated with the Florida investigation and received a reduced sentence of 3 years. 6 months after Grace turned 1, a card arrived at the Whitmore office. It said, "I hope she is well." No signature. I kept it. I am not entirely sure why. 1 year after the boardroom. April 14th. I am sitting on the balcony of the Whitmore penthouse with Diane, and Manhattan is doing what Manhattan does in April, which is looking extraordinary, in a way that seems slightly unfair to every other city. Grace is asleep inside. She is 13 months old, and she took her first steps 3 weeks ago, and she walked 7 steps across the living room floor, laughing the entire way. And I have watched the video 63 times. Diane says, "Do you ever think about that night?" The snow? I say every day. She says, "Does it still hurt?" I think about how to answer that honestly. I say, "It does not hurt the same way." For the first months, it was like a wound that was always open. Now it is more like a scar. It is always there. I know where it is, but it is not bleeding anymore. Diane says that is growth, you know? That is what growth actually looks like. Not the boardroom moment, not the Forbes cover, not the 4 million viewers. This. Sitting here saying it does not bleed anymore. She is right. She is almost always right, which is one of the reasons I keep her close. Whitmore Global has grown 40% in the past year. We entered 3 new markets. I am still learning things every week. I still make mistakes in front of executives, and I still go correct them instead of hiding in bathrooms, although the bathroom visits have decreased to approximately 1 per quarter, which I consider genuine progress. 3 months ago, I launched the Whitmore Foundation for Survivor Support. We provide legal assistance, emergency housing, therapy, and job training for people leaving abusive situations. The foundation started with a $50 million contribution from Whitmore Global. In 6 months, we have helped more than 2,000 people. 2 weeks ago, a woman came to my office. She had found us through the foundation website. Her husband's family had treated her the way the Ashfords treated me, and they had used the legal system the same way, and she had come in with the particular combination of exhaustion and determination that I recognized immediately because I had worn it myself. She said, "I saw what happened to you. When I saw what you built after, I thought maybe I could do it too." I took her hand and I said, "You can. And this time you will not be alone." She is in one of our foundation apartments now with her 2 daughters. She sent a photograph last week, all 3 of them in a new kitchen, laughing at something off camera. Underneath she wrote, "We are finally free. Thank you for making me believe this was possible." That is the reason. Not the boardroom moment, not the revenge, not the 4 million viewers. That photograph, that kitchen, those 3 people laughing. I want to say something to anyone listening who is in their own version of that snow right now. I know that when you are in the worst moment, it feels permanent. It feels like evidence of something true about you. It feels like proof that the people who called you nothing were right. I know because I lay in that snow and believed every single word Margaret Ashford had ever said about me, and I believed it completely. She was wrong, not because I turned out to have a billionaire grandfather, not because the story had a boardroom scene and a live stream and 4 million witnesses. Those things happened, but they are not the point. The point is that the version of you that exists in someone else's cruelty is not the real version. It is their version. It is the one they need you to believe so that you will stay in the role they have assigned you. You are allowed to refuse that role. It will cost you something to refuse it. It cost me everything I thought I had. But what I thought I had was not real. What I built after was. Here's what I know after 1 year of building. Healing is not linear. It happens at the same time as everything else. You can be grief-stricken and strategic simultaneously. You can be terrified and determined simultaneously. You can cry in a corporate bathroom at 2 in the afternoon and walk back into the meeting 4 minutes later and run it well. Both things are true. Asking for help is not weakness. It is the most efficient form of strength there is. Robert Whitmore spent 40 years building an empire alone because he was too proud to apologize to his daughter. He watched me from a distance for 2 years because his attorneys told him to wait. He died watching me be thrown into the snow because patience and strategy are not always the right tools. Let the people who love you close. The ones who kneel in the snow in $4,000 suits. The ones who sit on your hospital bed and know when not to speak. The ones who show up at custody hearings and look at the ceiling to maintain composure. Let them in. Your darkest moment is not your definition. It is your starting point. I look out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere in those lights is the Whitmore Global Building, my grandfather's name on it. Now my name too in the daily work of running it. Somewhere in the building behind me is Grace. Asleep in the room I painted myself, pale yellow, because she seemed to like the color when I held paint swatches up at her and she reached for that one. I think about a woman in a hospital gown with $23 and a shattered phone sitting in a snowbank on Christmas Eve. If I could go back and speak to her, I would say this: hold on for 4 more hours. Help is coming. In 5 years, you will be sitting on a balcony in April watching Manhattan do its thing, and your daughter will be asleep in the next room, and you will have built something real and true and entirely your own. The snow does not last. The spring is always coming. And the people who called you nothing were wrong about you in ways they will spend the rest of their lives understanding. Get back up. Your kingdom is waiting. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you not just a story, but a meaningful lesson and a reminder that no matter how dark the moment, the strength to rise is already inside you.